history of street gangs in the U.S. begins with their arrival on the East Coast around 1783, around the end of the American Revolution. However, the seriousness of these gangs are often questioned, but there's a good reason for this. The best available evidence says that the more serious street gangs weren't around until the early part of the 19th century. Street gangs on the East Coast started in three phases. The first group started immediately after the American Revolution ended, but it was only kids fighting over local turf. Serious ganging doesn't really start in New York until around 1880. These gangs tended to be way more structured and dangerous. The third phase starts in the 1950s and 60s when Latino and black populations arrived. The members of the gangs in the first period, late 18th century, were the same age as most members of current street gangs, around early teens to mid-20s. They consisted of five main groups: the Smith's Fly Gang, the Bowery Boys, and the Broadway Boys. They were all white and mainly Irish. And the Fly Boys and the Long Bridge Boys, they were black. The earliest gangs were not criminal groups. Many of them were employed mostly as common laborers. The arrival of the Poles, Italians, and Jews in the period 1880 to 1920 started the second period of the gang activity. These gangs were a bit more violent than the earlier gangs because around this time there weren't enough homes for all the families to live. So they fell back on violence to get what they wanted. The last major gang fight of this period occurred in 1914. Soon afterwards, all the gangs started splitting into tiny groups, while all kinds of juveniles and amateurs were coming up everywhere. By the 1950s, everybody had thought that youth gangs had disappeared, but an anthropologist in the city had done field observations and proved this thought wrong. Mass migration of southern blacks landed in urban, all-white neighborhoods, which caused interracial conflict. White male youth groups formed and violently resisted racial integration of neighborhoods, which led to black brotherhoods evolving into social protection groups. Under these conditions, street gangs became very, very common in the underclass. Now for the modern day. In the 1990s, post-World War II, urban renewal, slum clearances, and ethnic migration pitted gangs of African Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Euro-Americans against each other in battles to dominate their neighborhoods and to establish their turf. By 2008, about 640 gangs with more than 17,250 members were currently active in the New England region. As a result of all the gangs popping up, violence occurs a lot more due to competition among gangs for control of territories. The most significant gangs you hear of now are the Crips, Latin Kings, MS-13, Aneda, and United Blood Union.